I want to simplify the square root of secant squared minus 1, where theta is between pi over 2 and pi. So we know that 1 plus tangent squared is equal to secant squared. So if I subtract by 1, both sides, we get tangent squared is equal to secant squared minus 1. So we're going to replace secant squared minus 1 with tangent squared. So I have the square root of tangent squared, which is equal to the absolute value of tangent. But we're given that our angle is between pi over 2 and pi. So that is in the second quadrant. And there's a nice acronym we can use. All students take calculus. So in the second quadrant, only sine is positive. So that means tangent is negative. So we're going to put a negative tangent there. Okay, let's look at square root of 1 plus cotangent squared, where our theta is between 0 and pi. So 1 plus cotangent squared is just cosecant squared. And the square root of that is the absolute value of cosecant. Okay. So cosecant we can think of 1 over sine. So if we go back to the acronym, all students take calculus. We're given 0 to pi to be our angle. So think of this as 1 over sine. Sine is positive in the second quadrant, and it's also positive in the first, because the first stands for all. So that every of the 6 trig functions is positive in here. So it's positive in both those 2 quadrants, so we could just remove the absolute values. The next one is the square root of 1 plus tangent squared, where the angle is between 3 pi over 2 and 2 pi. So 1 plus tangent squared is just secant squared. And taking the square root of that will be the absolute value of secant. So the angle is between 3 pi over 2 and 2 pi. That means we're in the fourth quadrant. And in the fourth quadrant, only cosine is positive. So cosine and secant, actually. Okay, so that means we can remove the absolute values. Let's look at square root of cosecant squared minus 1. So we know that 1 plus cotangent squared is cosecant squared. So if I subtract 1 to both sides, I get that cotangent squared is cosecant squared minus 1. And now I'm going to replace cosecant squared minus 1 with cotangent squared. So that's going to be the square root of cotangent squared. And that's the absolute value of cotangent. Now the angle that we're looking at is 3 pi over 2 to 2 pi. So again, we're in the fourth quadrant. And the acronym, all students take calculus. So here, the fourth quadrant, cosine is positive, which makes secant positive. So cotangent is negative. So that means we're going to replace, or we're going to put a negative and get rid of the absolute value. Okay, next one is the square root of sine squared theta over 2. And we're given that theta is between 2 pi and 4 pi. Okay, so because I have theta over 2 and I have theta here, I want to make theta over 2, right? So I should divide everything by 2. So that means pi is between theta over 2 is between pi and 2 pi. Okay, so that's the third and fourth quadrant. Okay, so the square root and the square are going to cancel. We'll be left with the absolute value of sine theta over 2. And since we're in quadrants 3 and 4, let's see. We have all students take calculus. Sine is not positive in the third and the fourth quadrants, so that's why we're going to put a negative in front of the sine. Okay, last one. We have the square root of cosine squared theta over 2, where theta is between 0 and pi. So the square root and the square are going to cancel, and I'm going to be left with the absolute value of cosine theta over 2. Now I want to convert this theta into theta over 2, so I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And I see that I'm in the first quadrant, and in the first quadrant, everything is positive. Okay, so all of the 6 trigonometric functions, so I can just remove the absolute value, and that is my answer.